Right, we're joined this evening by SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena as we piece together the various moving parts around the world and even here at home with that Zelensky visit. But we won't start there. Let's go back a few steps and speak about the passing of Pope Francis, Sophie, because tributes are still coming in. In fact, one from the former President Thabo Mbeki today, who spoke about how humanity has basically lost a great person.
Well, we know many leaders have characterized the Pope as a symbol of peace and a vocal voice in terms of fighting for the marginalized and those who are vulnerable. And I think the statement from the former president, when you look at that statement, you can see that it's not a statement on behalf of the foundation, but it's a personal recollection of the former president in relation to the Pope, in that statement mentioning what we touched on earlier this week when the Pope passed on, that in February he was at the Vatican, former President Thabo Mbeki, invited to talk about the fair system of taxation, as the Pope wanted members of the public around the world, few high-profile individuals, to share their thoughts, because if there is no fair trade system and taxation, the vulnerable will be the poor. But the Pope couldn't attend or open that conference because that morning he then had to go to the hospital where he was admitted, and Mbeki talking about that and how they felt as delegates at the Vatican. However, that conference did continue, and the contributions and the inputs and presentations were made. And the focus here was, how do you make the taxation system to be fair for all countries, particularly the poorer ones, so that they can have resources, and with those resources they can deliver services to the citizens of their respective countries, but the issue of corruption being a major hurdle.
And please stand by for us, Sophie, because I want to take people who are perhaps just tuning in back to what we've been watching throughout the day from about 10 o'clock this morning, the viewing of the body of Pope Francis. Perhaps let's see if we're able to make out what's going on within Vatican City at this evening, the first night that he's lying in state. Let's have a listen. Of Pope Francis. We could stay with those pictures while we continue to talk just a while longer, because Sophie, one of the issues that we've been watching with you for most of this week is around the talk about the possible election, if you will, of a pope from the African continent to succeed Francis.
We know that this is a process that's going to be conducted by the Cardinal Conclave. And we know that it's going to take time, but depending on how members of that conclave will agree in terms of who should be the next pope, we know that because of the current challenges around the world, Tembekile, people have expectations. Different regions would want to weigh in terms of who should be the Pope because of their experiences. You'll have people who would want to push back in terms of progressive decisions that were taken by the current Pope or the late Pope Francis. But you have other people who are saying you need someone who will continue. I just saw earlier on, few minutes ago, literally, one of the so-called candidates, particularly from the continent and from Guinea. You can hear his tone that he's very conservative. And then you look at other names, you look at their messages, you can see that they would want to continue in terms of the issues that the Pope was passionate about, peace and security. And therefore, that's the problem. It is because the world is drifting apart, countries are divided, poverty is taking root, and unemployment and misery wars are characterizing this current age. And therefore, people are looking for leadership anywhere. And the Pope is seen as a voice that can provide that leadership, as we saw his statement, particularly hours before he passed on, where he spoke very strongly about a need for peace and stability around the world, particularly as it relates to the Middle East question, the rights of Palestinians to live side by side with the people of Israel.
And let's shift gears slightly, because there was another important event happening today in Lesotho. The South African government, President Cyril Ramaphosa, and a delegation visiting the neighboring kingdom. What was the purpose of this binational commission?
A binational commission is meant at strengthening relationship between the two countries, and therefore this was part of that at heads of state and government level, as it was escalated to that. And this time around, Lesotho, the Mountain Kingdom, was hosting this binational commission. They discussed the relationship between the two countries, but also a need for the region to be united, and the continent and the developing South at this critical moment, where you have challenges, shifting global trade relations, as we saw with the tariffs, calling for unity within the region, in the continent, and the developing South. The other important issue, the president was able to brief the Prime Minister about the G20 and Lesotho, wishing South Africa well, as the country will be hosting the G20, and Basotho perhaps hoping that the spin-offs will also reach their country or Mount Kingdom. The other important issue was about ensuring that you continuously strengthen the relations, because you have many projects, joint projects like the Lesotho Highlands Development Scheme Phase 1 and the current Phase 2 that is under construction. And the president, what happened there, he couldn't deliver his entire speech, as you can see, him shaking hands with Minister Lamola, because Minister Lamola had to step in. The president has challenges with flu, and his voice wasn't up to the best. So he spoke a bit just to show respect to Basotho and his host, including the king, even emphasizing that when he met the king in the morning, because first stop was at the Royal Palace meeting King Letsie III, the king said he must recover soon, and him saying that he's confident after that message from the king, he will be fine. So we'll see tomorrow.
Well, we hope that Basotho gave him cough syrup and a lozenge, because he's going to have to do a lot of talking tomorrow when he hosts Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. That's a working visit, but the war with Russia will likely come up as well, no doubt.
Maybe with the blessings of Basotho and the king, the meeting tomorrow, it's going to be a heated one, but it will be under control. You know that President Zelensky will be meeting President Cyril Ramaphosa at the Union buildings because of this working visit. It's quite a close, tight activity. It's not a state visit. Don't expect the pomp and ceremony. It's more of a working visit where the two leaders will be discussing behind the scenes, and after then they will engage the media should his host agree to have a press conference with the president, which is part of the program, and we will get a glimpse of the discussions. But I think the issue here will be, how are you going to ensure that there's peace in Ukraine, and both the warring factions, I'm talking about Russia and Ukraine, finally agree on a peace process and a ceasefire and cessation of hostilities. But today, minutes ago, I saw the Vice President of the United States of America, J.D. Vance, saying that almost throwing his hands in the air or being disgruntled because there seems to be no end in sight or do-nothing between Russia and Ukraine, him saying that both countries will have to compromise on issues of territory and that the country Ukraine will have to accept that Crimea is part of Russia. And on the other hand, Russia saying that this is what Crimeans wanted, but Ukraine saying it's not going to happen. So you can see those headlines. So it will be interesting to see President Ramaphosa, who led the AU peace mission to Kyiv and also to Moscow, meeting the two leaders, whether he will be able to convince President Zelensky to take a much reconciliatory tone. On the other hand, we know that the president did speak to the president of Russia, President Vladimir Putin, this week, and I think the discussions also revolve around that. So again, Africa trying its bit, and South Africa perhaps using its experience in terms of negotiations and diplomacy. As you know, that the foreign policy of South Africa is anchored around human rights, peace and security. So it will be interesting to see whether President Ramaphosa will be able to convince President Zelensky to agree to some of these issues. On the other hand, we expect people to protest, those who are against this visit and those who are supporting this visit.
Sophie Mokoena, SABC International News Editor, will be following you and the team tomorrow as we cover the working visit by Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky.